Hey, welcome this morning. This is Doug, your realtor here in Utah. Today, wanted to talk about something that is we're starting to hear a lot of chatter about, and after having just helped somebody with this one, I thought we'd speak to it and help maybe educate a little of all of us. So, in the real estate world today, one of the things that you're starting to hear about and see every once in a while is the seller letting the buyer assume the loan. So, what that means is that means just exactly what it says. So, if you're selling the house and you've got a 30-year mortgage and you've been there, let's just do simple math, right? We like simple math. So you've been there 5 years. So you've got 25 years left on your mortgage, and your interest rate is 4%. So the seller is going to let the buyer assume that, and maybe before we get going too far down that road, there are certain loans like FHA that allow you to assume, or the buyer to assume the mortgage. Not all do. So just to be clear, there are some rules and restrictions, small print, all that kind of stuff when it comes to even the assumption loans. So, all right. So our seller has been there 30 year or 5 years of a 30-year mortgage, and they've got a 4% interest rate. The buyer comes in and is going to assume that. Well, so what that means is the buyer then has to financially qualify, just like they were going to purchase, but they have to financially qualify on the remainder of the 25-year mortgage at the 4%. So they literally will just step in and just take over. So um, the one that I just finished, we did they so the first of the we finished it very last day of the month. So the first day of the month, the buyer then now it literally is steps in and has to make that mortgage payment the first of the month, because there is no, a lot of times with mortgages and buying a house, they give you 6 weeks or so before you have to make your first payment. So you may be able to skip a month. Well, not in the assumption process. In the assumption, you are literally just going to pull the seller out, insert the buyer, keep going. The with that, the typically what happens is that to assume the loan, there's a reason that's there, and to be able to assume the loan. So sometimes, well, like the one we just did that I just was able to help with, the sellers had not lived in the house very long. They'd only been there a short time, and so and they got transferred with work. Well, they had to. That was the way that they had to do it in order to uh, be able to have some financial assistance, and get a down payment and stuff. And so the buyer then comes in and says, "Well, I'm going to assume this, and then we're going to give you a bigger down payment, which actually goes to the sellers." So that down payment then is the what the sellers are going to take as kind of the equity in the home, if you will. So lots of moving parts in an assumption loan. So with the assumption, again, so that's kind of how it works. Is the seller is going to assume or sell it as an assumption loan. The buyer comes in, qualifies, and they literally just change the name on the mortgage, and off you go. I mean, that's oversimplified, but that's what it is. Okay, so now let's step back a second and talk about the mortgage company themselves. So in the world today, from a business standpoint, if our seller with their 4% mortgage rate and current interest rates as of today are right about 7%, again, simple math, right? So is 3% higher. So the from a business standpoint, the mortgage companies typically don't want to do an assumption loan because they want the seller to sell and then have somebody buy at a seven, so sell the 4% loan, sell it to somebody else that buys it at the 7%. And so then from a business standpoint, they get the extra 3% interest on the loan that they're sending out to the new buyer. So they don't, I mean, from a business standpoint, that makes sense. They want the most profit. They don't want to be stuck, or not stuck, but they don't want to have the low interest rates. They prefer the higher interest rate. And so with that, when it comes to the assumption side of things, typically, and I'm going to speak from our experience, the experience we had. So we went in, and it was literally, we were 6 days from 6 months from the time we started to the time we closed. So you heard me right. It was 6 months. So from now, so because it was one of those that, again, the mortgage company had all kinds of, oh, we're so busy, we can't do this, we need extra forms, but it gets so ridiculous. I'll give you an example. The mortgage company that the sellers have been paying their mortgage to ask in this assumption process, ask to have the sellers give them the paperwork showing that their mortgage was current. So stop and think about that just for a second. So the mortgage company that they're using and getting, they're paying, ask for them, the sellers, to get the paperwork from the mortgage company to send back to the mortgage company to say they are current with their mortgage. It's that kind of stuff and bureaucracy that they run you through to kind of frustrate the system, again, because ultimately they would rather have a 7% interest rate loan than a 4% interest rate loan because they make more money. It's really, it's that simple. They in our process that we had to do, the buyer that came in not only had to provide the documents, just like a normal loan, taxes and job histories and all those kinds of things, but also had to do a uh, phone interview with the mortgage company. So as we step through this, the contract goes into play. The phone interview, the fastest they could do that phone interview was at 2 months. And then you start into this paperwork, and not a whole lot of communication. It was, to tell you that it was a frustrating experience. It was overly frustrated, and I'm not talking about just for. I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about for the buyers, for the sellers, because moving forward each month, the sellers had to be current. So if they move, they have two mortgages that they have to pay: the current one and the new one that they have, and then the one in this house that they're assuming, because it's not been assumed yet. The names haven't changed hands, and so the assumption hasn't taken place. Um, so the Yeah, it was a very frustrating experience. A lot of the loan officers that I talked to have told me that most of the time their experience with assumption loans is that they go about 2 months, and then the buyer or the seller get tired and just quit. So it is a very frustrating experience because, and like I said, the sellers are paying two mortgages, whether that's rent and mortgage or mortgage, whatever. They still, if they're not there, and again, like this one we had, they got transferred with work, so they're not there. Um, so they're paying for an empty house. They're paying utilities on an empty house for 6 months. Well, all of this process goes on. Um, it's very, you know, uh, to me, the hardest thing really was just the lack of communication and the lack of, uh, you know, investment on the side of the mortgage company. Um, it was the mortgage company, just the way I envision that, and this is all my my take on it is that they take everything and put it into like a cloud queue to where so the file goes there. The file's not sitting on somebody's desk that looks at it every day and says, "Oh, we need to keep this going. We need to finish this. We need to do steps 3, 4, and 5 today." It's not like it's in a queue, and so then somebody, would holler, would ask, would whatever, and then somebody would go get it out of the cloud, work on it a little bit, and then put it back, and but it was very, very frustrating, even down to the part of getting the keys and closing. So this buyer signs the documents, we get all that, we get to that point, the buyer signs the documents, the seller signs the documents, they get sent to the corporate office for signatures. The corporate office couldn't be first and sign the documents and then have everything notarized and stuff on our end. So buyer seller sign, it gets sent back, and now nobody knows where it's at because we're waiting for, in order to record, and that's the word. It's not signing, it's recording. That happens, that gives us the ability to transfer ownership. So that county recording transfers the ownership. Well, we can't do that until all the signatures come back to the title company. So even that took 2 days with expedited FedExes and all kinds of stuff that way going on. And again, no communication. And the packet just showed up yesterday morning at title, and they said, "Oh, guess what this is? We finally got some information." So, assumption loans, they, in theory, they're a great deal. It's a great way for the buyers, if they have some extra cash, to be able to get their monthly payment lower by having a 4% interest rate rather than a 7. So there's some advantages that way. But as you go through this, just understand that it's going to frustrate you. It's time consuming. It's like it was like spending 6 months at the DMV on a bad day. So expect that, and and but remember, the light at the end of the tunnel is a lower interest rate and a lower payment. So as long as buyers and sellers are both willing to go the distance, let's go. But you know, so as you see things, it's not just a quick, you know, blink, or it's not just, hey, sign here and we're done. It's a process. And again, the mortgage companies really would rather not do the process. And so it's not their first priority. So anyway, there's your assumption loans. Uh, any questions with real estate, where I'm at. I'd love to help you. Um, there's a lot more to everything. So watch the other videos, share them, and I'll see you as soon as we can.